Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning into this video. I am Jay Theo, and today we're going to be discussing internalized homophobia and its impacts. Now, I'm really interested to discuss this topic because I feel like internalized homophobia is not something we talk about enough in the gay community, and it has very intense, long-standing effects to a lot of members in our community. So I really want to take some time to touch on this topic and really kind of branch out and discuss the impacts that it has on us. But before we get to that, first off, I want to say thank you to all of my subscribers, all of my new subscribers, my past subscribers. Thank you. We finally made it to over 1,000 subscribers. I'm super excited. I really do appreciate all of the love and all of the support. I recently got a new job, so I took about a month off from YouTube. Guys, you know, get a new job, having to get acclimated, settle in, but I'm loving my new job, and I'm back to continue to push out content for you guys. So I will be continuing to push out more content now that I'm kind of back in the swing of things here. So guys, with all that being said, we're gonna go ahead and dive right on into this video. We're gonna discuss internalized homophobia and its impacts. So guys, what actually brought on the idea of this video was actually a TikTok that I posted where I was kind of rambling off different challenges we face as dating as Black gay men, and I ended with internalized homophobia. And I got a really good reaction from a lot of people about this topic. I got a few big comments about internalized homophobia, so I thought, why not talk about it? So guys, I'm gonna play the video just so you guys can see kind of what led up to this, and then we're gonna dive deeper into the topic.
Hold up. Roll it on my wrist. Roll it on my bitch.
What?
30 on my waist.
What?
30 to your face.
Yeah.
60 to your face.
Yeah.
90 to your face.
Yeah.
That's a closed case.
Yeah.
You are old.
So first off, let's define what is internalized homophobia. I know it kind of sounds like it pretty much defines itself, but let's actually speak to what the definition is and kind of talk through that a little bit further in detail. Internalized homophobia is both a conscious and unconscious reaction to external negative attitudes towards people with a sexual orientation minority. In many cases, internalized homophobia starts and is nurtured during the formative years of childhood and adolescence. So internalized homophobia is really birthed from our time as adolescents and kids. That's where it comes from, which makes sense. That's where we gain our understanding of what being gay is. That's where a lot of us first encountered homophobia, was from our adolescence and our childhood. And it usually came from our immediate family or our closest family and friends when we were young. Basically, you know, and that's kind of like the textbook definition, but I see internalized homophobia is in your internal kind of hate for your sexuality, and this kind of internalized buildup over time of you building resentment and hate towards your own sexuality. And I feel like a lot of people in the LGBTQ community deal with this because we are taught and we are raised, you know, especially if you're raised in a more traditional household, and even just the way society showcases gayness, especially 10, 20 years ago, it has always been a very negative homophobic light. Just in the past, I would say 5 to 10 years, I would say more so like 5 years or maybe 5 to 7 years, have we really seen like an uplifting, more positive view of the LGBTQ community. And even then, we still have issues. You see all the issues we have with celebrities still giving backlash, people like DaBaby, T.I., and we still have a lot of negative aspects of homophobia in our community, especially in communities of color and especially in Black communities. So, and that's why I really want to speak to this as well, is that internalized homophobia really has a stronger effect on Black communities and communities of color, primarily because we have such intense levels of homophobia in general in our communities. So we, as gay individuals and LGBTQ individuals, we definitely have heightened levels of internalized homophobia. And I actually will drop some links in the description of some studies where you can do a little bit more research and dive a little bit deeper, that this actually has been studied, and it is true that we as Black and POCs of the queer community deal with higher levels of homophobia and internalized homophobia. Now that we got the textbook definition out the way and my own personal thoughts and definition out the way, now I want to really dive in and discuss the impacts of internalized homophobia. Like I said earlier, there are some really intense, long-standing effects of internalized homophobia that really has negative impacts on us in our community. And I really want to touch on what those impacts are. So I will be diving into 5 different impacts that I think are super important to discuss. And I really want to hear from you guys in the comments. I really want want to start a discussion around this. So these are the biggest impact I think that we have to deal with, which are extremely concerning when it comes to internalized homophobia. First impacts I want to discuss is our sexual risk and behavior. So Georgia State actually did a study, and Emory University also did a study as well, where they created a study to see if there was a correlation to internalized homophobia, internalized racism, and our risk to sexual behaviors. And there actually has been signs of a correlation. So basically, the more internalized homophobia and internalized racism you have towards yourself, more likely you are willing to take sexual risks with your sexual behavior. And I think the reason why, and you can dive a little deeper in these research studies, but I'll talk about this a little later in the video, is that you kind of build a self-hatred so that you are kind of okay with inflicting self-harm, and that's why it increases your risk behavior when it comes to sex, because you have this internal self-hate because you are internalizing your homophobia towards yourself. So that's kind of why that connects. Hopefully that made sense. Like I said, you can dive a little bit deeper in the studies that I provided, but one of the biggest impacts of internalized homophobia is our sexual behavior and risks that we take with regard to our sexual health, which in turn, for especially for Black and queer individuals of color, heightens our risk for HIV, AIDS, and STIs. So that's one of the first impacts I wanted to discuss when it comes to dealing with internalized homophobia. So the next impact I would like to discuss when it comes to internalized homophobia is self-hate. So first I would like to define self-hatred or self-hate, and this definition is being provided by Psychology Today. Once again, I will drop these links in the description. Self-hatred encompasses continual feelings of inadequacy, guilt, and low self-esteem. People may constantly compare themselves to others, perceive only the negative, ignore the positive, and believe that they will never be good enough. So that's a very brief definition of what self-hatred is. And signs of self-hatred can look like this: all or nothing thinking, always focusing on the negative, having low self-esteem, always looking to seek approval, never able to accept compliments, often feeling jealous, being really fearful of positive connections, afraid to dream big and go bigger and set big goals because you feel like you're not good enough or you don't deserve it. Being overcritical of yourself. It's always good to be self-critical, to always keep yourself on your toes, but to always be overcritical, always bringing yourself down, always being negative. And lastly, always having a cynical viewpoint. So not having a positive outlook on life, being very negative, very cynical, and just really never thinking that things can get better, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So yeah, self-hate is a big issue when it comes to internalized homophobia, and I really wanted to touch on that. And the reason why is gonna lead to my next big impact that I think comes from internalized homophobia within the LGBTQ community, which is depression and self-harm. It is a known fact, and there's been numerous studies that members of the LGBTQ community experience higher levels of depression, higher levels of self-harm, and higher levels of suicide. This is a known fact. I'm gonna provide some links in the description so you guys can dig and do a little bit more research. But just at the top of my head, I know in the Black queer community, we are about 20% more likely to experience depression compared to our straight counterparts, and we definitely have higher suicide attempts and rates than our straight counterparts. And the same goes for white LGBTQ, Latino, Asian, all levels of LGBTQ. We experience higher levels of depression, we experience higher levels of self-harm, and higher levels of suicide. And we also take a lot more risk, like I said earlier, when it comes to our sexual health, which to me is also another form of more of a subconscious form of self-harm. Now, obviously, this is a huge issue because we deal with higher levels of depression. So when we deal with higher levels of depression, that also means we are dealing with higher levels of stress day to day. And we already, as queer people, are dealing with being marginalized at our jobs, in our friend groups, in our communities, in our own races. Then on top of it, we are now dealing with, levels of depression because we are resenting and hating ourselves for the fact that we just are gay. And that's why I think it's so difficult sometimes for, that's why intersectionality and understanding that is so key, because already if you are a gay person, you're dealing with homophobic parents, or you're dealing with a homophobic community, and then you start building up that internalized homophobia and that resentment. But then top off of it being black, being Latino, being Asian, being a minority, or dealing with those levels of racism, especially in the black community and the brown community. When you are dealing with racism, then you have to deal with those levels that affect your depression. Now you're dealing with being gay and those levels of dealing with depression. I mean, that's why I'm gonna say this one thing about Dave Chappelle is that intersectionality is key when you are speaking to what affects the black community and what affects the LGBTQ community. And at the end of the day, there is so much trauma that goes on having multiple levels of marginalized characteristics or backgrounds. Being a double, triple minority is basically what I'm saying. Being black, being LGBTQ, being trans, all those things, when you have multiple identities like that, that's why understanding intersectionality is so key, because that leads to heightened levels of depression, that leads to higher suicide rates, that leads to so much negativity that we start feeling for ourselves. And it's really sad that we, as in the queer community and queer community of color and black queer community, that we have to deal with so many levels of trauma, so much from our upbringing growing up that causes us to hate ourselves, resent ourselves, and ultimately kill ourselves. And if anything, I want this video to anybody out there that is queer, that is black, Latino, Asian, white, whoever you are LGBTQ, if you are trans, you are loved. We appreciate you in this community. You are special in this community. You make this community great. You are loved, and do not think you are not loved. But I've been there before. I've, myself have had moments where I did not want to be on this earth. I've had moments where I've inflicted self-harm to myself. I have, because of being gay and feeling like I'm feeling like I'm not loved, or feeling like that I don't matter. So just to anybody out there, just know that you are loved. You are appreciated, but I definitely understand the trauma that we go through when we are growing up in the church, when we are growing up religious, if you're growing up in communities that are homophobic, and that don't allow you to be yourself, and what that does to you. So I really just want to say, this is a huge impact from internalized homophobia. It's self-harm, depression, suicide, all of the above. And I definitely really want us to take this seriously. And that's why I think if you have access to therapy, if you have access to counseling, please utilize it. And that's why I think it's even more important for, if you are a person that is queer, to find support groups, find other LGBTQ people, to where you can build a community and feel more like yourself, because you matter. You deserve to be on this planet just like anybody else. And it's so sad that we build up this hate for ourselves because of the communities that we are raised in and the environments that we are placed in. So I just want to end this impact with that. But yes, just know that you are loved. The next biggest impact that I want to talk about when it comes to internalized homophobia is the fact that we deal with heightened levels of just a more pessimistic view on love and relationships and dating. I know for myself, I honestly have a very, unfortunately, I do have a very pessimistic view when it comes to the idea of finding a partner, finding a lover, finding a mate, just because I feel like there is so much homophobia. I meet so many guys to this day that I date that are out openly gay, that are internally homophobic and do not love themselves. And also being black and gay, I deal with a lot of men who are also are internally racist towards themselves, that don't even love blackness, that don't even love their own race. And I've also met Latinos, people like this. I've met Asian men like this who do not love their own race. And that in itself causes another level of resentment when you are trying to find love. When you are Latinx, when you are black, when you are Asian, and your own community does not want to date you, that creates another level of self-hate. That creates another level of trauma. That creates another level of resentment that causes these levels of depression. So I definitely think, and that's why for me, I have been in therapy and I do a lot of self-work to get my mindset out of being pessimistic about love. But honestly, I don't see a lot of showcases of black gay love. I don't see a lot of showcases of just LGBTQ love in general. So it does make me view love in a pessimistic way. And I feel like that in turn creates a different level of internalized homophobia, where I don't even think that love sometimes is possible. in the LGBTQ community. And this is just me being honest. I definitely want love. I'm pursuing love. I definitely want that. But if I'm being honest with you, I have some level of internalized pessimistic views about homosexual love and LGBTQ love that I feel like in turn a lot of my peers can agree with. And I think that is a huge impact of internalized homophobia, is that we have a pessimistic view on love. We don't think we can be loved. And then in turn, we don't find love. So that's another impact I wanted to bring up and be honest with you guys about. Lastly, one impact that I want to discuss that I feel like is very huge and prevalent in the LGBTQ community, no matter what race you are, is domestic violence. So I think internalized homophobia also brings out domestic violence. The reason I say this is because we as same-sex, gender-loving individuals, we think that we often are on the same playing field when we are dating someone, so that if we have arguments, that if we have tiffs, that we can square up, we can fight. And a lot of that rage that comes on when we attack each other comes from our internal hatred or homophobia that we have. And I think that also leads to a lot of domestic disputes. Now, if I'm not being completely clear on this, I apologize, but I definitely think domestic violence in same-sex and LGBTQ community is very high. You can do some research on it. I'll try to see if I can look some studies up to drop in the description, but that's also a huge problem and a huge impact, and that comes from internalized homophobia. And I, as myself, as someone who I've definitely gotten arguments with other gay men before, and anytime I get in an argument with a fellow gay man that I've been dating, they always call me the F word. They always call me the F word. So I just feel like just that in itself just showcases that, you know, there's internalized homophobia there. Why am I arguing with somebody I'm dating and their first word is to call me the F word? That is not okay. And that's how I know that internalized homophobia also leads to domestic violence, and it leads to a lot of verbal abuse as well that we find in these homosexual relationships. So guys, that pretty much wraps up all the different impacts and my thoughts on internalized homophobia. I really hope you found this video helpful and insightful. I really think this is a topic that we need to take a lot more time to talk about. Like I said, I will try to drop as much research and studies in the description as I can so you guys can do a little bit more digging yourself. And also, I just wanted us to have this conversation so that we can acknowledge that it's there. Let's acknowledge that we do have internalized homophobia, that we deal with internalized homophobia, that we are traumatized, and that we need to work through it. And even though all of us, I know therapy is a privilege, all of us cannot afford therapy, all of us can take part in therapy and counseling, but even if we can have these conversations with each other, we can divulge, we can talk about these things, we're bringing the trauma to light and we're able to address it and move forward and have these conversations. And I think that's counseling in itself. So I want to ask all of you, do you feel that you've ever had moments of internalized homophobia? Do you still have moments of internalized homophobia? And how do you check yourself when you're having those moments? How do you check your partner when they're having those moments? It's so important for us to acknowledge and look at ourselves and see how we contribute to the toxicities in our LGBTQ community. And I really want to challenge you to ask yourself, when do you experience levels of internalized homophobia, and how do you check yourself and address yourself when those things happen? So guys, this was an amazing discussion. I'm really looking forward to hearing your comments. Please be sure to comment. Let me know, like if you liked. If you haven't subscribed and you enjoyed this video, please do. So guys, as always, be sure to do your best to stay positive, stay curious, and I will see you guys on the next video.